Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Yud Beis concludes the discussion as to whether there is Tumas Negoim, whether Tzaras applies to shuls and Batei Medrash. Along the way to that discussion, the Gemara also discusses the Kedusha of Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, and whether they belong to the Shvatim, to the various different families of Klal Yisrael, or they are individual to the particular Shvatim in which they reside. The Gemara then goes back to the Mishnah and discusses the halacha of the Kohen HaGadol, who's set aside to be the substitute for the main Kohen Gadol for the Avodah of Yom Kippur, should something happen to him. The Gemara would like to know how he gets inaugurated, and the Gemara will also discuss the belt of the Bigdei Kahuna, and what it looked like, and if there were differences between the belt of the Kohen Gadol and the belt of a regular Kohen, and some other halachas of the Bigdei Kahuna. So, the Gemara is in the middle of a machlokas as to whether a shul is susceptible to negayim, whether there is tzaras on a shul or not. And the Gemara has had a contradiction on the subject, and the Gemara has tried to resolve the contradiction by saying there's a difference between a shul in a big city and a shul in a little village. And the reason is that in order for a building to be susceptible to negayim, it has to be owned privately by an individual, or even perhaps by partnership, but it has to have clearly defined ownership. A shul in a big city belongs to the public. It's usable for hordes of people who come in and out of the city at any time. You can't say that it's clearly belonging to or under the auspices of any specific individual or group. A shul in a small village is owned in partnership by all the people in the village. There aren't others that come in and out all the time, and therefore it is susceptible to tzaras. Now the Gemara is going to question both of these halachas. First of all, the Gemara says, is it really true that a shul in a big city is not susceptible to tzaras? And the Gemara brings a brisa, which has a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, as to whether Yerushalayim, the shuls in Yerushalayim, are susceptible to tzaras or not. And the Gemara will say, but they both seem to agree that generally a shul in a big city should be susceptible to tzaras. Now the machlokes goes as follows. The Torah, when it describes the halachas of tzaras, says that it's in a place which is called achuzaschem, your public inheritance. So the Gemara says both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim agree that the Beis HaMikdash is not anybody's private inheritance. It belongs to all of Klal Yisrael together. It's not anyone's personal inheritance. Therefore, there's no tzaras on the Beis HaMikdash. But Rabbi Yehuda says that only applies to what he calls the Makom Mikdash, the place of the Beis HaMikdash. The other shuls, the other places around Yerushalayim, is implied by Rabbi Yehuda, do not have this halacha that they are not susceptible to tzaras. They are susceptible to tzaras. They don't have the status of the Beis HaMikdash. The Chacham say no. There is the same rule applies to the rest of Yerushalayim, and there is no tzaras on the rest of Yerushalayim either. And the Gemara explains what is their machlokes. Their machlokes is whether the Torah Zaschem applies to the rest of Yerushalayim or not. Does Yerushalayim belong to the specific shevet in which it resides, which is Shevet Yehuda, or does Yerushalayim belong in partnership to everyone, all of Klal Yisrael together? Now, Rashi explains that when Yerushalayim was conquered from the Yevusim, it could be that money was collected from all of the Shvatim, or was given to all of the Shvatim equally, in order that Yerushalayim to belong to them. That is a possibility that it belongs equally to all the Shvatim. It was never actually given specifically, it wasn't specifically part of the portion of Yehuda, Shevet Yehuda. So, there's that machlokes. And that machlokes is based on whether Yerushalayim qualifies as belonging to all of Klal Yisrael, or if it's only one specific inheritance, one specific portion. Based on that is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim as to whether there is a halacha of tzaras or not. But there is no machlokes that shuls, even in a big city like Yerushalayim, should have the halachas of tzaras. If there's no other issues of inheritance and clarity of ownership, shuls should have the halacha of tzaras should apply to shuls. So how could we, therefore, in our attempted resolution, say that shuls in big cities don't have susceptibility to tzaras? So Gemara says you have to change what Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda didn't actually say that shuls in Yerushalayim are fine. He wasn't saying shuls are fine. He was saying he didn't say a makam mikdash is fine. He said a makam mikudash is fine. Makam mikudash, he meant a holy place is fine. Any holy place is not susceptible to the halachas of tzaras because of its holiness. And he was referring to a holy place in a big city where there is no halacha of tzaras because it doesn't have a private ownership. It belongs to the public, and that's the opinion that holds, as we said earlier, that a shul in a big city does not have susceptibility to tzaras. Now, the Gemara wants to go deeper into this machlokes as to whether or not halachas of tzaras applies to Yerushalayim. And the Gemara says that there's a machlokes tanaim on the subject, and the Gemara is going to bring two brises, one which holds that Yerushalayim belongs to all the Shvatim equally, it doesn't belong to any particular family or individual, and the other which holds that no, Yerushalayim belongs to the individuals in which its inheritance falls. So the Gemara brings the first brise as follows. The Gemara says that the Harabayis and the Beis HaMikdash, whose portion do they fall into? So this brisa says that they fall in defined portions of defined shvatim. From the Mizbeach on eastward, throughout the rest of the Harabayis, is in the Chelek of Yehuda. From the Mizbeach on westward is in the Chelek of Binyamin. Now, north is also Binyamin, and south is Yehuda. So it comes out that the Mizbeach itself is surrounded on two sides by Yehuda, on the east and on the south by Yehuda, and on the north and on the west by Binyamin. Underneath the Mizbeach itself is also belonging to the Chelek of Binyamin. There's a tiny piece, there's a one amma piece that sticks out of the Mizbeach into Yehuda's Chelek, and the Gemara says that Binyamin is sitting and agitating over that piece that's outside of his Chelek, and he always wants it, as the pasuk says, Chofif Olav Kalayom, he's agitating over that area. The Gemara says, therefore Binyamin has a special schus, and he got the Aron to be in his Chelek. He's hosting the Aron because of his thirst to have the Kachim, the holy areas, in his Rishos. So this brisa clearly holds that Yerushalayim belongs to the Shvatim in which it was apportioned to. Now, the Gemara now brings a brisa which says that Yerushalayim belongs equally to everybody. And this brisa says you're not allowed to rent a house in Yerushalayim. When people come to be regular or any other time, people who live in houses in Yerushalayim cannot rent them out and collect money for the rental. And that's because it really belongs to everyone. The land on which the house is built belongs to everybody. You may hold this house all year round, but you can't rent it. So Gemara says, Rav Elazar goes even further. He says you're not even allowed to rent a bed because the land on which the bed is belongs to everybody, doesn't belong to you. Now, the Chazal did make a rule, though, that if you're going to stay in somebody's house for Aliyah L'Regel, you do have to give him the skin of your karbanos. The skin is not kachim. Anybody's allowed to use it. You do have to give them the skin of your karbanos, and if you don't give it to him, they're allowed to take it by force. The Gemara goes a bit further and says that not only are you allowed to take the skin, but the rule is also that the jugs you should leave with your owner. Abaye adds that as well. So the Gemara therefore has now quoted that machlokes. Now the Gemara moves on to challenge the other half of the difference which we said between shuls in big cities and shuls in small villages. We said that shuls in small villages are susceptible to the halachos of tzaras because they're owned in partnership by the entire village, and that's enough to make them susceptible to tzaras. And where brings a brisa that says that's not enough. The brisa says when the Torah says that tzaras could apply to homes, it uses the word achuza, an inheritance. The word achuza teaches me that it can't be that the land hasn't been conquered yet. It's got to be conquered. Not only conquered, it has to be divided amongst them. It has to be divided up amongst the Shvatim. It also has to be divided up amongst the families and the particular individuals. Everybody has to be able to point to his exact piece of land and say, this is mine, I have sole ownership of this. And therefore, anything which is owned in partnership by a group does not have the halachos of tzaras, and therefore even a shul in a little village shouldn't be susceptible to tzaras. So the Gemara says, you're right, we're going to withdraw this answer to the contradiction that we had about as to whether or not there are tzaras and shuls, and we'll just go with the other two answers which we used earlier that said that in order for there to be tzaras, there has to be a certain circumstance. Either there's machlokes on the subject, or it's got to be that somebody's house is located in the Beis HaMikdash itself, in the shul itself. The Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah where we had seen that we appoint a separate Kohen to act as the replacement, the stand-in for the Kohen Gadol if something happens to him and he cannot serve. Now the Gemara's question is, how is the second Kohen inaugurated? You can't just jump into the avoda of the Yom Kippur service. He has to first become the Kohen Gadol. Something has to make him into that level because the Yom Kippur service has to be performed by a Kohen Gadol already. So how does he become the Kohen Gadol? So the Gemara has a couple of ways of explaining this. First of all, the Gemara does not mention that normally a Kohen Gadol could be appointed by putting Shemen HaMishcha, the special inaugural oil, on him. Now, the Gemara leaves that out. The Rishonim explain possibly because we're talking about in the second Beis HaMikdash where there was no Shemen HaMishcha, it was not around any longer. So the Gemara says, what could you do? So the Gemara says, And generally what we do is that he puts on the special clothing of the Kohen Gadol, at least for a day, minimally for some service, for some time, and then he can do an avoda, then he becomes a Kohen Gadol, and then he's ready to do the rest of the avoda of Yom Kippur. The problem is, says the Gemara, that only helps if the first Kohen becomes possible before the Karban Tamid, because the Karban Tamid is performed with the Kohen Gadol's special 8 clothing, which the other Kohanim don't wear. So if that avoda hasn't been performed yet, by the time the original Kohen Gadol becomes puzzle, becomes tummy or whatever it is, the replacement can step up, do the avod of the Karban Talmud, wear all 8 clothing, and then he will now qualify as the Kohen Gadol. He can go ahead and perform the rest of the Yom Kippur service. However, the Gemara says, if the avod of the Karban Talmud was already done by the original Kohen Gadol, the first Kohen Gadol, and then the Kohen Gadol becomes puzzle, there's nothing left for the replacement Kohen to do, that he will wear the special clothing, the 8 garments that the Kohen Gadol wears. The only available service to do is the Yom Kippur service, and during that he only wears 4 garments, the same 4 that a regular Kohen Hedyot wears. So there's nothing for him to put on that'll be Mekadesh him to be the Kohen Gadol. He's only going to wear the same 4 things. There is no special Kohen Gadol. There's nothing that sets him apart as a Kohen Gadol. Now his clothing's white, but it's still the same 4 garments that the regular Kohen Hedyot wears, and therefore he's not going to qualify as a Kohen Gadol. There's nothing for him to put on. So Gemara has a couple of approaches here. Abaye says, let him just do something. Let him go up on the Mizbeach and turn over a piece of meat in the fire with a special fork. By moving the meat around, that counts as avoda. We know that the halacha is Rav Huna says any non-Kohen who were to do that would be chayiv misa because it's avoda. So it can only be done by a Kohen. So let the Kohen do that. And as the Kohen Gadol, he could put on special Kohen Gadol clothing. That is the 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol, and do that. Then he becomes a Mekudesh as the Kohen Gadol. He can go change into the 4 garments of Yom Kippur, which is the same as the Kohen Hedyot, and now he's a Kohen Gadol already, no problem. The Gemara offers another option. The Gemara says that just doing the avoda of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is enough to inaugurate him. He doesn't have to actually be wearing special clothing. Just by doing the avoda, that works. As like we know, we have a precedent for this, that a kli, a tool used in the Beis HaMikdash needed to be inaugurated as well, as long as there was a Shem and HaMishcha that was used to inaugurate them. But if there was no Shem and HaMishcha, just by using them, they become inaugurated. So it's possible that the Kohen Gadol could step up and step into that role just by starting to do the avoda. The Gemara, however, has a different possibility, and this is somewhat of a lengthy discussion. And this possibility is that maybe the belt that he's going to wear on Yom Kippur is different than the standard belt of a standard Kohen Hedyot, and therefore by putting on that belt, he already becomes Mekudesh as the Kohen Gadol. Now this is a sugya, and it's not clear whether the belt that the Kohen Hedyot wears matched the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur, or the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore all year round. Now, the Torah specifically describes the belt of the Kohen Gadol. It says that the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore all year round was made out of shatnez. It was a mixture of linen and wool. The belt that he wore on Yom Kippur, that was pure linen. That we know. But what we don't know is what was the Kohen's Hedyot belt. He only had one belt. He wore it all year round, including Yom Kippur. But was it shatnez like the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore all year round, or did it match the Kohen Gadol's belt on Yom Kippur, which was that it was pure linen? We don't know what that is. Now, the Gemara says, according to the possibility that the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur was different than the belt that the Kohen Hedyot wore, then by putting on that belt on Yom Kippur, he will set himself apart and he becomes Mekudesh. If, however, the Kohen Hedyot's belt matched that of Yom Kippur for the Kohen Gadol, then when he puts on the special belt for Yom Kippur, it's the same as the Kohen Hedyot. He hasn't set himself apart in any way, and therefore that wouldn't help. Now the Gemara goes deeper into this machlokes as to what exactly was the belt of the Kohen Hedyot. Did it match the belt of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, or the belt of the Kohen Gadol on every day of the year? The Gemara says it's a machlokes between Rebbe and Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, what the belt of the Kohen Hedyot looked like. The Gemara quotes a few people who brought this. Rav Dimi brought it and didn't know who said what. Ravin brought it and he said that Rebbe is the one who said that the belt of the Kohen Hedyot matched the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore all year round, was made out of shatnez. The Gemara brought a brisa to try to prove that. The brisa quotes Rebbe as saying that there is no difference between the begadim of the Kohen Gadol and the begadim of the Kohen Hedyot except the belt. The belt is different, and it's the only difference. Now the Gemara says, what are we talking about? Are we talking Yom Kippur? Or are we talking all year? If we're talking all year, what do you mean there's no differences? There are many differences. The Kohen Gadol has 8 garments, and the Kohen Hedyot only has 1. Obviously, we're talking about on Yom Kippur, and still Rebbe is telling me that there is a difference in the belt. So obviously the belt of the Kohen Hedyot matched the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore every day of the year, and it was the same as, it was different than the one he wore on Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Shimon who said no, it was the same as the one he wore on Yom Kippur. So that again supports that Rebbe is the one who said that it was made out of shatnez. Now the Gemara brings another source that Rebbe is the one who said that, and this is a bit of a lengthy conversation. This is a drasha, which is spoken out in a brisa from the word Besari. The Torah tells me that when a Kohen Gadol is going to, when a Kohen is going to do the Trumas Hadeshin, that's he takes a shovelful of ashes off the Mizbeach and deposits it in a special place. So it says the word lavash twice. It says he should be wearing his midoi bad, that refers to the ksonis, the shirt, and it says he should be wearing his michnesei bad, the pants. And then it says yilbash al b'sari, he should wear. It says the word wearing twice, but it only specifies two of the garments. And it says v'lavash hakohen midei bad, u'michnesei bad yilbash al b'sari. Why does it have to say wearing twice? That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says the second yilbash has a couple of different ways of explaining it. The Gemara brings a brisa that says that is to show that he's supposed to be wearing the other two garments, not only the ksones and the mechnesayim, not only the shirt and the pants, but also the mitznefes and the avnei, also the hat and the belt. That's Rabbi Yehuda's pshat. Rabbi Daisa disagrees. Rabbi Daisa says this is come to tell me that he's allowed to wear the Kohen Gadol's garments of Yom Kippur. Remember, the garments of the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur technically qualifies as regular Kohen Hedyot clothing. It was just 4 garments. It was made, again, it was white, but it was just 4 garments. So perhaps he could just wear that. Now, in the pasuk describing the avoda of the Kohen Gadol, it says that he takes off that clothing the last time he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and he leaves them there. Well, he doesn't leave it in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he leaves it in the place where he changed. But the question is, what happens to them then? So Rabbi Daisa says, this pasuk is coming to tell me, an extra word Yilbash, that the Kohen Hedyot could use them afterwards. They're available. They don't have to be put into Geniza. They don't have to be left for anything else. The Kohen Hedyot is allowed to wear them. Now, on that, Rebbe disagrees. Rebbe says there's 2 things wrong with that statement. First of all, the belt doesn't match. It's a different belt. Second of all, you cannot have clothing go from a high-level Kedusha to a low-level Kedusha. The Kohen Gadol used on Yom Kippur. It cannot go to a low-level Kedusha to be used by a Kohen Hedyot the rest of the year. But what we do see from here is that Rebbe does say that the belt is different, and this is saying that the belt of a regular Kohen is different than the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur. So obviously then it matched the belt that the Kohen Gadol wore the rest of the year, which was made out of shatnez, not out of pure linen. Now, how then does Rebbe understand the extra word yilbash? What's that for? So the Gemara says that will tell you that you're allowed to use worn out clothing, even though you replaced it, and as long as it's not ripped, even though it's worn out clothing, you're allowed to use that. Rashi brings the possibility that you're supposed to dafka use worn out clothing when doing the service of the Trumas Hadeshin, the ashes, so that you don't get filthy from it and then use dirty clothing for the rest of the avoda. Rashi rejects that. Rashi says that only applies to removing the whole pile of ashes when it becomes too big. It doesn't refer to the daily avoda of removing just one shovelful. That doesn't make you dirty at all. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa that again spells out the machlokes between Rabbi Daisa and the Tanna Kama. The brisa says that the question is, how do you understand the words v'hini cham sham? When the Kohen Gadol is finished, he takes off his clothing and he leaves them there. Tanna Kama says leave them there, meaning you can't use them for anything. They have to go into Geniza. They have to be hidden in the ground. Rabbi Daisa says it just means that he shouldn't use them for a different Yom Kippur service, but a regular Kohen Hedyot is allowed to use them afterwards. Okay, the Gemara now begins a slightly new topic. The Gemara wants to know what happens when the original Kohen Gadol returns. His psul is over, he's finished, he missed the Yom Kippur service, but now he's back. Now what happens to the replacement Kohen Gadol? He was Kohen Gadol for a day, what does he do now? So Gemara quotes a machlokes. Gemara has a brisa, and the brisa, the first opinion is that he doesn't do any avodah of the Kohen Gadol, but he does keep the halachos of Kohen Gadol. He has not allowed to marry a widow or any of the other halachos of Kohanim Gedolim. He's not allowed to be metame, even for close relatives. He has to keep all of those halachos. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yossi says that he doesn't become anything. He's not a Kohen Gadol and he's not a Kohen Hedyot. Now, The Gemara explains that an incident happened. Rav Yossi brings it as a proof that an incident happened. There was a replacement Kohen Gadol who actually stepped up and took the job and did the avoda on Yom Kippur. His name was Yosef ben Elam, lived in Tzipori. He became the Kohen Gadol for the day of Yom Kippur. And Chachamim said then that the first Kohen Gadol afterwards goes back to his service, and the second is not neither Kohen Gadol nor Kohen Hedyot. Now the Gemara says, why not? The Gemara says because he can't be a Kohen Gadol because then it'll be competition. It'll cause the first Kohen Gadol to be upset. He has somebody who appears to be competing with him. He's even wearing clothing of the Kohen Gadol. He can't be Kohen Hedyot because you don't go down in Kedusha once you're a Kohen Gadol. You don't go down afterwards. Now, says the Gemara, what's the halacha? Rav Yechon says the halacha is like Rav Yossi, but should the second Kohen, step up and do avoda, he is allowed to do it. He's not supposed to do any avoda, but should he do so, it counts and it's a kosher avoda. Now, Rabbi Yehuda quotes Rav saying the halacha is like Rav Yossi, and Rav Yossi furthermore agrees that if the first one dies, then the replacement becomes Kohen Gadol again afterwards. And Gemara says, well, that's obvious. Why would I think not? Whereas you may think that the Kohen Gadol, the first one, will still be upset that his replacement is walking around out there, even though he's not actively a Kohen Gadol now, but he knows that as soon as he dies, his replacement has already been identified. That may make him upset, and the Chiddush therefore is that it will not, and you're allowed to have his replacement.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.